All right, so if we look at this first question, basically we're going to be doing what we did yesterday, but backwards. So if you remember correctly yesterday, we found the midpoint of an ordered pair where we did x1 plus x2, and we divided it by 2, and then we did y1 plus y2, and we divided it by 2, and that gave us the midpoint. You guys remember doing that yesterday? So what we're doing today is we're going to be doing the same thing, but we're working a little bit backwards, okay? So if you read that first question, it says find the coordinates of A. So A is going to be some unknown coordinate, x and y here. And then it says that P is the midpoint. And the ordered pair for that is 3 and 1/2. And then that B has the coordinates of 8 and 3. Okay, so I'm just kind of setting it up here. So let's say that's our segment. So yesterday we were given the 2 endpoints and we had to find the midpoint, correct? Today we're given one of the endpoints, the midpoint, and we have to find the other one. So we're going to have to work backwards. And what I mean by that is this. We're going to let the one endpoint that we don't know, it's x and y, okay? Or we can x1 and y1. And then the other endpoint is going to be x2 and y2. The midpoint is going to be the result of what I have. Is everybody ready? Kind of. All right, so yesterday, what did we do? We added x1 and we added x2, correct? Mm-hmm. So we're going to add x plus 8. And then we had to divide it by 2. And then that equaled the x value of my midpoint, which in this case happens to be 3. So what I'm having to do is I'm having to kind of work backwards and set myself up an equation to be able to find what the other endpoint is. So some unknown x plus 8 divided by 2 is going to equal the x value of my midpoint. So if I have that equation up there, x plus 8 divided by 2 equals 3. In order to solve that, I need to get rid of the divided by 2. How do I undo division? Multiplication. So what we want to do is we want to multiply both sides of this equation by 2. What that does over here on the left side is those 2's just basically cancel each other out. And that leaves me with x plus 8 equals, what is 3 times 2? 6. I'm going to bring this up over here a little bit so I have some more space. And then if I wanted to continue solving that for the x, what would I do? Subtract the 8, yep. And so x is going to equal negative 2. So the x value in my A is going to be negative 2. So you kind of see how that works. It's a little tricky because we have to work backwards, but the process is still the same. We're still essentially using this formula. We just have to solve for the missing piece. Is everybody okay with that? Is it okay if I erase that so I have space to work the next one? Okay. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's think about the y value now. I need to add my 2 y's here. So this first y I don't know. We're going to add it to the other y. So we're going to say y plus 3. Divided by 2 is going to equal what? 1/2. So let's go ahead and do that. And just put, whoa, try that one more time. Put a 1/2 over here. Are we okay so far? Now, how do I, go ahead.
Was the one that you just did was supposed to be the first one or after?
They're both part of it. I just didn't have room to put both. So the first thing we did was we found what the missing x value was. Now we're going back and doing the y value. So it's all the same part of the question, yeah. Yeah, it's all part of that first question. We just have to do it twice for x and y. All right, what did I do? I need to get rid of that 2. So to undo dividing by 2, we multiply. The 2's are going to cancel, leaving me with y plus 3. What are the 2's going to do on the other side? They're going to cancel as well and just leave me with, what'd you say? 1. Mm-hmm. So I have y plus 3 equals 1. So finish solving that for me. What would I do? Subtract 3. And so your y value is also going to equal what? -2. So A is going to have a coordinate of the x value -2 and also a y value of -2. So that's your answer. We have to do both. We're looking for both x and y's. Can we check that? Watch. If I wanted to go back and see if I was right, what's -2 plus 8? And 6 divided by 2 is 3. So it works, right? -2 plus 3 is 1. 1 divided by 2 is 1/2, isn't it? So we can just check our work and make sure we're doing it right. I want you to try the next one. Same thing. They call the letter something different now, but we want to find Q. Okay, so we can change that. We want to find Q. If R is my midpoint, and that's 6, -1, and then my other endpoint S has coordinates of 12 and 4. Okay, so what I need you to do is find out what Q would be. What's the X value for Q? What's the Y value for Q? Remember, you're working backwards. We're working backwards to find the order pair for Q. So take the 2 X's for Q and S, take the X for Q, the X for S, add them together. Remember, the X for Q we don't know. So take the X for Q and the X for S, add them together, divide it by 2, and set it equal to the X value in R. Okay, this is working backwards here. Like, look at your 2 endpoints. You want to add the 2 endpoints together, divide it by 2, and set it equal to that. I got a question for you. Is 0 a number?
No.
It is, right? It's on the number line, isn't it? So is it okay if we ever get 0 for an answer? Yes. Sometimes we think that 0 is not a real number, and so it's not a good answer. That is not true. 0 is a real number, just like everything else. When you put it with other numbers, yes. Sure. What's the X for my Q? Well, before I find it, how do I set it up? What is it called right now? X plus the X for my S is 12 divided by 2 is going to equal the S for my midpoint, which is 6. Okay, same thing. We're going to multiply by 2. So that's going to give me X plus 12 equals 12. And then if I solve for X, what is X going to end up being for the endpoint? 0. Okay, so for Q, my X value is going to be 0. And then we're going to repeat that process for Y. Okay, again, it's exactly what we did yesterday. It's just working backwards a little bit. Okay, so let's set it up. I'm going to take the unknown Y value right now, plus, what is the other Y value? 4. I'm going to divide that by 2, and it's going to equal the midpoint Y value of -1. Okay, remember, Y plus Y divided by 2 equals the Y of the midpoint. If I multiply both sides by 2, again, this is the same step every time. That's going to give me Y plus 4 equals -1 times 2 is -2. And then what would I do? Subtract. Thank you. And so the Y value. So my answer, the ordered pair for Q is going to be 0, -6. Okay, so this is the concept when it gives you one endpoint and a midpoint, and you're looking for the other endpoint. If I give you both endpoints, it's just add, divide by 2. But if you're missing one of your endpoints, you're going to have to work backwards. Is that kind of okay? Somewhat. Everybody ready? Okay, go ahead. You good? Okay. Everybody caught up? All right, so the next section we are going to talk about, we talked about midpoints yesterday, and the midpoint was where? In the middle, okay? So when we are talking about that, the midpoint separates a segment into 2 congruent segments. We also mentioned that yesterday. Remember, congruent means exactly the same length. We talked about that a couple days ago. Therefore, we can say that the midpoint bisects. Okay? Think about the prefix there, the bi, like a bicycle. How many wheels does it have? 2. So to bisect something means we cut it into how many equal parts? 2. You need to know that. When I say it's bisected, you need to know, okay, well, that's cut in half, meaning 2 equal parts. Any segment in a, any segment line, excuse me, plane or point that bisects a segment is what we call a segment bisector. Okay, you need to know that word, because if I say that point A is a segment bisector, you need to know that that cuts that point into 2 equal, cuts that segment into 2 equal parts. So do you remember how I mentioned the other day that in geometry we cannot assume things, that I actually either have to be told that or I have to be shown that with markings? So this is another way I can tell you that you're going to have congruent segments, is I can say that this is a segment bisector, which means it has cut that segment in half. Right? Is everybody okay with that? So For the next example, it is asking me to find the measure of segment RT. And then what else is it telling me? It says T is the midpoint of RQ. Okay. So I want to find the length of RT. What am I going to have to figure out before I can tell you how much that is? What's in there that I don't know? The variable, the x, right? So don't we need to figure out what x is first? Yes? So look at your picture. What does it tell me, or what does it have RT labeled as? 2x plus 3. What does it have TQ labeled as? 4x minus 5. Because T is the midpoint of that, what does it mean about those two segments? What does it say in the paragraph? The midpoint cuts it into two congruent segments. So if T is my midpoint, would RT and TQ be congruent to each other? Yes. What does congruent mean in math? What symbol? Equals. So what did you tell me RT was? 2x plus 3. And we say that's going to be equal to TQ, which is? Okay, so what I want you to do is solve that equation for x. Okay, each of the small segments are congruent to each other because T is the midpoint. Once we figure out x, then we can go back and plug it in and find what the length of RT is. Remember I told you a lot of the times you're going to have to find x and then you're going to have to plug it back in to find another part. So we're going to need to be careful with that. We should be solving this equation for x right now. Don't make me do the work for you. We have a quiz coming up on Thursday. Did we get a value for x? Yes, no, maybe. I'm going to subtract my 2x over. 4x minus 2x is 2x. I'm going to add my 5. Running out of space. So that's going to give me 8 equals 2x. So what is x going to equal? Okay. And that's not my final answer because it wants me to find RT. RT is this part right here. So what do I do with that 4? Plug it in. What's 2 times 4? And 8 plus 3 is 11. So the answer to that is 11. Does that make a little bit of sense? Okay. I would like for you to do both the next two. You got to find x, and then you're going to have to plug that back in to find the length of whatever segment they're looking for. For the next example, S is the midpoint. The one after that, B is the midpoint. So make sure you're using that. It's very similar to what we just did. We want to find x, and then plug that x back in to find the length of the segment that they are asking us for. We should be working on the next two examples, solving for x, and then plugging them back in to find the length of our segment C. All right, we ready? Sure. Okay. What do we know about RS and ST since S is in the middle? The two small segments, what do we know about them? They're congruent, which means I'm going to set them equal. So I'm going to go 7x minus 5 equals 6x plus 4. That's going to be 1x minus 5 equals 4. I'm going to add my 5 over, and I get x equals 9. But they didn't ask me for x. They asked me to find RS. Whoops. So that is this piece right here. So I'm just going to take and plug that in. 7 times 9 minus 5. So that's 63 minus 5, which gives me a length of 58, which is what I saw on several people's paper. Make sense? And then the next one, B is the midpoint. So what am I going to do with A, B, and BC? Set them equal to each other. I'm going to subtract my 2x over. It's going to give me 3x minus 3 equals 9. I'm going to add my 3 over. Come over here. Run out of space. I don't leave much room to work here, do I? So that's 3x equals 12. And so what is x going to equal? 4. Okay, now on this one, though, it doesn't ask me for just one piece. It asks me for the whole thing. So what I need to do is just plug it in. I'm going to go 5 times 4 minus 3. What's that give me? 20 minus 3, which is 17. And if that part is 17, what is the other part going to have to be? 17. So together, I would just add, and I would get a total for AC of 34. So that this time, every other question, they were asking me for just one of the small segments. And this one, they wanted the whole thing. So I just had to plug it into both and then add them together. Does that make a little bit of sense?